Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. For years, my patterns featured patch pockets, which I like because, nothing ever has roomy enough pockets. Over the years, I've had students request something different, maybe not as visible as a patch pocket, but still accessible and roomy. A welt pocket, though much trickier to install, is a great solution. Here, I've created a welt pocket in each of these two vests. The one on the form behind me and this one out of this Chanel type tweed. Because the welt is placed on the diagonal, entry is so much more natural. Though, this creates more complicated issues with grain lines. And I do want to mention here that this type of pocket is not recommended for an unlined jacket. The construction method leaves a number of raw edges on the wrong side of the fabric, so the components for creating the pocket are best covered with a lining. First, let me say that you can purchase the pattern download for the welt and the pocket from my e-store. The link is below, of course, in the show notes. And the purchase comes with detailed step-by-step directions and replacement pages for 3 of my patterns, the 100 jacket, the 200 jacket, and the 800 vest. The replacement pages will show the exact position of the welt. Here's what a replacement page looks like. Just substitute it or tape over the existing page or pages. Sometimes it spreads over 2 pages, depending on the pattern. And you can use this replacement page on any other pattern that you might have, as long as you figure out where you want the welt to go and what's comfortable for you, and you keep the page parallel to the grain line of your pattern. Make sure when you print the patterns for the replacement pages, welt and pocket, that you print at full scale. There is a test square on each of the pattern pieces to make sure. Once you've cut out your fronts, you'll need to transfer the markings for the pockets to the fabric. I used tailor's tacks. I covered transferring the markings in a separate video. Take care that you transfer all 6 of the welt location markings. This will ensure that you have the correct welt on the correct front. They are not interchangeable. I'm currently working on 2 jackets. These are my 200 jackets. They have lots of darts and are finished off inside with Hong Kong seam finishes. I've covered darts and these seam finishes in previous videos. One of the jackets is a commercial Harris tweed, which will help my viewers see what I'm doing in the video demonstrations. And the other is a very busy hand-woven mohair and wool fabric woven from hand-dyed skeins. I've created a welt pocket on each one of the fronts. The welt pocket on the Harris tweed has been cut from a caviar leather skin I purchased in New York City many years ago. This plum color brown is one of my favorites, and I used the leather in many other projects, like the vest that I'm wearing. I'm down to a half a skin left. The hand-woven fabric has a hand-woven welt from the same fabric, but because of the intense striping, matching the stripe was a challenge. Let me show you how I did that. By taking a tracing of the welt pocket pattern, folding it, and placing it by lining up the markings with the appropriate front, I actually drew the stripe design onto the welt pattern with my colored pencils, which allowed me to find a spot in my scraps that exactly matched that area on the hand-woven front. I've already gone ahead and sewn the darts, which I used to demonstrate how to sew darts in a previous video. The back of the welt pocket will need to be supported with a fusible interfacing, which can be awkward to place with the darts sewn. In the directions, I have you fuse the interfacing first and then sew the darts. You'll need a strip of knit interfacing, like Fusy Knit. I sell 2-yard by 60-inch wide packages in my shop. Cut the strip about 6 inches or 15¼ centimeters long and 1½ or 3.8 centimeters wide. Follow the grain lines of the welt pocket pattern piece, which will place it on the diagonal. Since the welt is actually placed on the bias, you'll want to stabilize the area but retain the flexibility of the cloth. Just a note, if you are planning or have already applied a fusible underlining to stabilize the entire garment, you would actually do that before even the darts are sewn. But if you've done that, you can skip this step because the whole area is already stabilized. On the wrong side of the garment, you're going to center the strip over the markings and fuse with a good steam iron. So here are my markings, and I have centered this strip over them. If the markings are actually not visible on the wrong side when you flip it over, because tailor's tacks are on the right side of the garment, you can poke through to the back with a pin, piercing the tailor's tack right through the center to locate where that pin marking might be. Now, because we put the tacks on the right side of the garment, they shouldn't interfere when I fuse this stabilizing strip onto the back. Use a press cloth. I have covered the application of fusible interfacing in a separate video. At this point, you've covered any trace of the markings on the wrong side of the garment with the interfacing. So you'll have to retransfer that information to the back onto the interfacing strip. Now, what I've done is I've used a pin to poke through to the back, indicating the 6 pattern markings. And then I draw them with a pencil, black or white, depending on what color interfacing you're using. Now we're going to connect the dots with a pencil line, creating a rectangular box. The 2 long edges of the rectangle should be parallel and exactly ½ inch or 1.2 centimeters apart. With very small reinforcing stitches, meaning the smallest stitch your machine can do and still move forward, we're going to start on a long side, stitch all the way around the welt placement position, through the central dots, pivoting at the corner dots, and end by overlapping where you started. Make sure that your placement lines are parallel and exactly ½ inch apart. I've already cut the welt pieces for each of the 2 garments. The Harris Tweed welt pocket is leather, so grain lines aren't applicable. The welt pocket for the striped handwoven has been carefully cut to replicate the stripe pattern. I've transferred the markings to the right side of the handwoven welt with tailor's tacks and to the wrong side of the leather with chalk. Don't put tailor's tacks in leather. I've also cut a piece of fusible tricot interfacing to stabilize the welt on the handwoven fabric. Now, since this welt is cut on the bias to work with the grain lines of the garment, you'll want to cut the fusible tricot on grain to help minimize any stretching of the edge of the fold of the welt. We're going to fuse it with a good steam iron and a press cloth. Because this leather is so flexible and lightweight, I've chosen to fuse the back of it as well with the same interfacing. I did a test to be sure that the leather could handle the interfacing, so this is a scrap, and by fusing that same knit interfacing onto the back, that will give me a more stable welt once it's applied to the garment. Next, we're going to fold the welt in half lengthwise, right sides together, matching the dots. We're going to stitch across both short ends using a 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Don't forget to backstitch. Don't forget to return your machine to a normal stitch length. And now we have to trim. We're going to grade our seam allowances on the short sides and trim the corners by the fold. Once you've clipped the corner, grading the seam means you're going to cut the first seam allowance at 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter, followed by the second seam allowance at 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. Turn the welt right side out. Use a point turner to carefully work out the corners. And now we press. We're going to machine baste across the open end of the welt 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters from the cut edge. Note, the seam allowance on the open edge is only 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters. This will become important later on. I'm going to reset my machine to machine baste. That means the biggest stitches that your machine can do. Most likely you would be working both welt pockets at the same time, one for each of your fronts. So checking to see if you have the correct welt on the correct front would be a really good idea. Since I've already created the welt in one of the fronts, it's pretty obvious that the one left fits the remaining front. But you would check by lining up the welt on the garment front and checking for the position of the central dots. Though I'm not generally a fan of removing the tacks during the construction process, it's best left until the end. There's so much stitching about to happen that the tailor's tack markings will become so anchored by all that stitching that they'll be nearly impossible to remove later. Remove the corner tacks from the welt, but leave the center dots intact. On the right side of the fabric, position the welt face down on the corresponding garment front, lining up the seam line with the lower placement line and the central match point. The folded edge of the welt will point down towards the lower front edge of the jacket or the vest. Now that flap will be stitched down, and once the opening is created, it will fold up. So double check that you have it in the correct position. Pin the welt into position. This is more challenging to do in leather since you can't pin and the clips won't help. I'll use tape. The basting line of the welt should sit along the lower pocket placement line of the garment front, and the cut edge of the welt should sit along the upper placement line. They should be a ½ an inch or 1.2 centimeters apart. Flip the front over and find the reinforcing stitching that you created after you interfaced the area. Machine baste through that lower edge of the welt placement rectangle. That means big stitches, no back stitching, capturing the welt flap. So we're going to check now from the right side to make sure that our basting was accurate. Trim the ½ inch or 1.2 centimeter seam allowance of the welt to a ¼ inch or 6 millimeter. Now it's time to add the pocket pieces. You'll need 2 pocket sections and 2 pocket linings. That is a pocket and a lining for each side. Since I've already made one of the welts, there's only one of each left. You'll notice that on the pattern, the long straight edge of the pocket has a place where you cut it off for the pocket lining. So this part would be removed. I've done that already, and you can see that the pocket lining isn't as tall as the pocket piece. Note that the long straight edge of the pocket and the pocket lining piece have a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeter seam allowance, and the curved edge of the pocket has a 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Make sure that the markings have been transferred to the pocket and the pocket lining sections using a black or white pencil, whichever is appropriate. Start with the pocket lining. That's the shorter one. Place it right side down on the garment front, centered over the pocket placement lines, matching the dots. It should extend 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters beyond the pocket placement lines and the welt on either side. The top straight edge of the pocket lining should line up with the upper edge of the placement rectangle. Carefully pin in place, keeping the pins away from the stitching line. It would be helpful at this point to remove any of the other remaining tailor's tacks that indicate the corners. Again, it will be really difficult to remove them later on once you do this next line of stitching. And again, always leave the center dots intact. And remember, I can't pin into the leather welt that's underneath. from the wrong side. Starting at a corner dot, use the reinforcing stitching as your placement guide. Stitch over the previous stitching and basting. Follow the lower long edge of the reinforced pocket placement line. You're stitching with normal stitches and through all layers. Don't forget to backstitch. The stitching should not extend beyond those corner dots. Check carefully that no stitching or backstitching extends past the corner. Again, check to make sure that you have not stitched past the corner dots. On the right side, check that the pocket lining is correctly positioned before proceeding. Next, on the right side of the front, we're going to position the pocket piece, that's the longer one, over the upper placement line of the placement rectangle with the right sides together. It's helpful to fold the seam allowance of the pocket lining back out of the way and secure with a pin so it doesn't get caught. And you'll notice that as I pin, I'm pinning well away from where I'm going to be stitching so that I can leave the pins in and not worry about stitching over them. So again, here's your stitching line, and that should line up on the upper placement line of the pocket rectangle. And this cut edge should be along the pocket placement line of the lower part of the rectangle. Now, again, on the wrong side, make sure when you flip now that you don't get any of the pocket pieces folded and caught. On the wrong side, again, starting at a corner dot with a normal stitch length, we're going to secure the pocket section by stitching through the reinforcing stitching on the upper placement line, ending at the opposite corner, and don't forget to backstitch. I've checked my position. I can see that my stitching does not extend past the corner dots. And when I fold this down, just to double check, the two pockets are going to line up on top of each other. Isn't that magic? Now comes the moment of reckoning. Up until now, any issues can be corrected by carefully ripping out the stitching. Moving forward, we will be cutting into the cloth. So this is the point of no return. Double check that everything is correct. We're going to work from the wrong side of the garment. You're going to be cutting through the center of the reinforced pocket placement line. Keep your fingers underneath, very carefully keeping those seam allowances separated so you don't cut anything that shouldn't be cut. Cut to within a ½ inch or 1.2 centimeters of the side wall. We have to create a seam allowance on this side wall. So I'm going to veer off and clip right into that corner and come back over here and do the same. Now, don't be shy here. You must go all the way to the corner for this to turn properly. Just don't go through your stitching. That would not be a good thing. So now I have seam allowance on this side as well. Flip the piece around. Make sure you get your fingers in there so you don't cut anything untoward. Now comes the fun part. From the right side, push the pocket and pocket lining through to the wrong side. We aren't finished yet, but it's starting to resemble a pocket. So at this point, we have to press all the elements into position. From the wrong side, line up the pocket section with the pocket lining, carefully pinning the curved edges together. Now we're going to be stitching this from the other side, from this side, so you have to keep the pin heads well away from where we're going to be stitching, so we don't stitch over them. So now before I stitch those two pocket pieces together and secure the sidewall triangle, I'm actually going to change my foot. I have been sewing up to this point with my walking foot, which was great for working with the hand-woven fabric and the wools and trying to get things to feed together. But when I work on a lining or something lighter weight like that, I don't want the bulk of the walking foot. It does not handle linings well at all. So I'm going to switch to my straight stitch foot. It is my favorite foot. With the right side of the garment facing up, I know that's counterintuitive. We have to fold back the front edge to expose the underside of the pocket and that little triangle, which you'll see right here. We have to stitch over that really securely so that will close up the side wall of the welt. We're going to continue now along the curved edge of the pocket with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And as we approach the other edge of the pocket, there's the triangle. So we're going to have to come up and stitch over that really well. We can remove our pins. And now, from the front, we have a finished pocket. Again, you can see that little triangle. We're going to be stitching right in there, very, very close. On the right side of the garment, you're going to hand stitch the side walls of the welt flap to the front of the garment, because right now It's a bit floppy, but you can see what we have behind here is that this is all filled in with lining, and you'll have a really lovely pocket once these two are attached. Here you can see I've sewn the side walls of the pocket, which is a little challenging with leather. I kind of came up behind and grabbed through the seam, and so you can't see it, but that was a little challenging. Now you're going to give everything a thorough steam press, and then on the inside, I suggest finishing off the pocket pieces with a serger or stitching on the edge, or use nylon tricot as a seam finish like I did here, which I have covered in another video. Though the jackets will be lined, the lining won't be attached at the hem, so the pocket edges, you know, could potentially fray, and you know, and it'd be better to secure them more for security than for looks. There are a lot of steps to this type of pocket, and you do need to be accurate. But each step isn't complicated. Practice, of course, on some scrap. You know, I made quite a few of these on bed sheets until I really was happy with the way they came out. Practice will help you secure the sequence of the steps in your head. This is a discreet and comfortable pocket. It's suitable for any jacket or vest. The welt can work in hand-woven fabric, or any companion fabric or coordinating fabric as well. And although it be cumbersome after the fact, this type of pocket can actually be installed after the fact with a jacket or a vest that screams for a pocket but doesn't have one. Just make sure that the grain line of the pattern pieces that you are using for the welt are positioned parallel to the grain line of your pattern. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.